research that hopefully will be conducted and then finalized. If you contribute to CPS, you can be on this committee. So again, industry experts, and Trevor's one of those individuals who's on the technical committee to review research that's relevant. So the last part is the strategic priorities. So when you think about the first one, facilitate actionable research, you know, science is great. And I know within 5 minutes I can get glassy-eyed because I don't know all the terminology and so on in terms of the science. But I know science is heavily needed for us to understand more about what's happening. But if it's not applicable, it doesn't have that much meaning. So as an individual working with CPS and the main board that oversees the mission at hand, the research that's done, the intention is to make it applicable, to make it applicable, to have it in best practices for good agricultural practices, or whatever level of food safety compliance we need to be at, so we don't live through advisories and even recalls going forward. So I love that one. And then second is facilitate, translate, and distribute knowledge. So I'm going to talk about that actually in the next slide here. And that is, what I found was important as I was chairing this organization was that CPS is the best kept secret in the industry. And I'm thinking many of you have never even heard the Center for Produce Safety. And that's a shame, because it's started in 2007 on the heels of the spinach outbreak, when we had an issue there in 2006. And there are two organizations, PMA and Taylor Foods, that put up $1 million each to start this organization. And it's a completely separate organization. It's not PMA. It's not any individual company. It's its own organization. And again, sole focus is produce food safety. So what I found was it's necessary. We got to get the word out of all this great work that CPS is doing. So we created this knowledge transfer task force. And basically it's doing just that, provide more outreach of all this great research that's been conducted for the, 12 years later. And Doug Grant, who's the head of the Oppenheimer group, he sits on the board. He's chairing this group, and he's done a remarkable job generating some articles through different media publications to get the word out. And there's two main audiences. One is the C-suite executives, so those who, again, we want to convey this great information to you on what's out there and something you may think about in terms of adding to your food safety practices. But we don't want to get too technical either, right? But the C-suite executives are folks that are decision makers. They can make a difference to putting food safety as the #1 priority on their list. I know for us, if any supplier came to us and asked us, geez, we've got this great product, it delivers on flavor, it's a wonderful item, we can give it to you 52 weeks out of the year, we say, well, thanks for calling us, but let's put that aside for a second. What's your food safety practices? That's what we ask first. We don't get into cost, we don't get into quality, we don't get into any SKU that's going to deliver great experiences to our customers. We want to know what your food safety practices is, and then we can talk once we validate that you're doing the right thing at the moment. And we can always add more research or more best practices over time. But that's our conversation in the initial. So we have this whole effort, and the reason, again, why we're here is because of this effort, getting the word out. So again, I thank SEPC for allowing us to be here to talk about this organization. And I'll tell you, as a retailer, I talked about romaine and the impact. And as you know, we've had 3 episodes, but we had the one in the spring of 2008 in Yuma. And at the time, we didn't have Yuma products, so we were okay with the California product that was on display back in the spring. And I'll just look at the one commodity that drives a lot of volume for us and others, and that's romaine hearts. How many buy romaine hearts? Anybody buy romaine hearts in the room? So a good percentage. So when that episode happened in the spring, not until the week before Thanksgiving did we see unit movement up from the previous year. So guess what happened the following week? The advisory hit. So if you think we're doing really well with romaine now, no, we're not. And I'll be frank, we've lost millions in sales. But all that isn't really the issue. The issue is consumer confidence. When you erode consumer confidence and a consumer fears the most healthiest of ingredients and eating that product because of food safety, we've got to be better. We've got to be better. So that's why I love the fact that we have the center, and again, why we're spending some quality time on the prevention side of this equation. So, and then this is just to show you an example of how CPS is providing the funding. And here's a challenge grant that's really targeted towards funding research that's most relevant and necessary. And if you look at the dollar amount, it's no small amount. This award is a $500,000 grant, and we call it the Grab It Award, and that means Growers Risk Assessment Biomarkers Investigation Tool.
It's my fault.
That's a mouthful. And I got through it.
Yeah.
So, but okay, now you know what it is. But again, high value and the opportunity for technology innovators to develop, refine, and focus their solutions to meet the need, identifying evidence or conditions where cross-contamination can occur in our growing environments. So this has a lot of meaning, and we hope to conduct some great research on behalf of this grant. And we know that the environment is pretty critical when you're growing. And I know animal operations has been under the microscope as of late. So it's those types of conditions that this type of grant will address. So I just want to give you an example of the research and the funding. Now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Seslow and let you take it from here.
All right, great. And I'm live, maybe, I think, or will be. Thanks, Dave. Just want to assure you that we're trying to, provide this information, give you an overview of some of the things that the Center for Produce Safety has funded and is funding, in the future. Again, you cannot predict where fundamental science will take you, but the real vision, the real laser focus is around, funding research to find solutions that is actionable, as Dave shared with you, things that we can do. And so this is kind of a starting point for this, perfect segue from that Challenge Innovation Grant Program, first time that CPS has...
Can you hear Trevor okay in the back? You can? Okay,
yeah?
Good.
Okay, great.
Sure.
And so I'm going to go through it in as much of a plain language, lay technical approach. They've got me wired with this little electric shock thing. And if I drift into techno jargon, Dave pushes a button and it brings me back in line.
I can't wait to push the button, so fire ahead. Fire away.
So really this is a direct response. Again, it's not something that we haven't been aware of in the industry, haven't been aware of in, sort of among produce safety research professionals. I spend a lot of time working in this area, but really in response to industry input, we need these kinds of, we need this kind of information around proximity to animal feeding operations, certainly the large ones, the CAFOs and the super CAFOs, but really to try and address risks that growers can evaluate, handlers, shippers, processors can collectively evaluate in any given situation to really bring reasonable level of science around setback, distances, metrics for any audit program, whatever it may be, but also to help prevent the kind of experience we have without necessarily knowing how much that played a role in this sort of three-peat of outbreaks with E. coli or other pathogens, but certainly working hard to try and prevent a four-peat. So really this is a justification based around having to take steps to increase the stringency of setback distances. And I apologize for the acronym, but I had to come up with something as I was pitching this other than to call it, a biomarker detection platform, nano, whatever. So it's just a handy handle. And it's designed to give innovators and technologists, after a very deep dive into the literature, knowing that there are formats and platforms, miniaturized and deployable in many different fields, biomedical, animal science, environmental toxins, all the components are really there. And that we needed something that was scale independent. You know, obviously the priority in the first applications will be in situations where you have very large population densities of domesticated animals, but we needed to get the information, but from doing a lot of research, and I'll apologize one time only, trying to come up with examples of work that CPS has funded. I did lean heavily on projects that I was involved in that got funded that got published, you know, just simply because they happened to be there and fit in. So it's building on that established knowledge that brought us to the point we are. And I knew that you can't have, there's not enough money, there's not enough time, there's not enough people to put these bioaerosol monitoring devices of different types, you know, in many, many places to really understand it. So we needed a simple, low-cost, easily implemented tool that you could really use right down to the farm level to broaden the knowledge and regional risk exposure. So the Leafy Green Marking Association looked at what was going on, the available science that CPS had funded to look at distances and said, we need to do something different than we have. We're going to move the setback distances that are going to be required for separation further based on the outcomes of this study. In between, from now going forward, we can develop a tool that can be used broadly in many, many different areas that you never could get to otherwise, to then evaluate that over time and say, do we need to make it more stringent? Can we relax it a bit? I think we're ready to go to the next example. So of course, water, I'm sure you've all read an awful lot about the either potential or likely role that, you know, water sources, particularly in primary production, irrigation, foliar sprays, you know, but even beyond that into post-harvest has played in a number of outbreaks, and particularly in the more recent ones. And the work that FDA and the Centers for Disease Control have done in looking at water source as a frequently identified root cause factor in produce outbreaks, but also in very costly and very large recalls. Just sort of highlighting that CPS has been funding and focused on agricultural water in many different components of how to address the quality, how do you do, you know, mitigation and prevention steps, what role you play, but even down to the fairly simple things of what are the best practices in sampling, how often, how much, where, and a number of projects, over, you know, 36 very diverse issues and regional projects, several key projects conducted, you know, here in the Southeast region that really help provide, again, the foundation for understanding what we call the risk potential and the risk exposure. So we pulled ag water because, again, in response directly to the recent outbreaks, pulled it out of the normal cycle of making requests for research proposals of the more traditional type, and like that grab it concept, pulled that out of the sequence and said, we need to fund something now. It needs to be more tailored, and we actually need to be a bit more prescriptive in working with the research community to get to those solutions, to get to those actionable research components. So I'm in the process of putting that together. It'll be announced April 1st, and with the intent to start funding by September 1st. And you know, if you have some questions, I'm happy to share some details, but it really focuses on what I've heard ever since, you know, I came back out of private sector into the university as an extension research specialist back in 1995, as the first good agricultural practices started being developed, and growers would say the same thing. I want to do the right thing. I want to get it right. I don't want to make anybody sick. Just tell me what to do, when to do it, how often, how. Give me the tools that are reasonable, sensible, and I'll put them into place. So we're going to focus on water treatment. That is one of the biggest issues right now. You can't sample enough frequently under realistic conditions to know and measure your water quality that way. Therefore, there may be times when certain types of water, particularly surface water, simply needs to have responsible levels of treatment, and we have a lot of experience in that. But we have questions about soil health, you know, that we need to allay. And, you know, to do it environmentally responsibly. Again, I won't go into a lot of details there. Go ahead and advance it.
I didn't know we were going to have Michael McDonald playing in the background for you, so just to keep this entertaining.
It's better if you're distracted by music.
I do like him.
Just softer. So again, you know, we started onto this, anticipated that this would be an issue. CPS funded this work that went on for 2 years, and we're simply asking the question, let's pick an antimicrobial, in this case chlorine dioxide. It has certain desirable properties, and ask the question, if you're irrigating tender greens, in this case, over a 2-year period, can we measure any difference in the microbial community? So the normal background, many beneficial bacteria that are there on the plant, in this case baby spinach, or in the soil, no impact, done at a dose that was effective in controlling the E. coli in the natural water source. So again, building on that, we're going to go out and spread that out into many, many different regions. Go ahead. Let's keep going. Okay, now this one's a little more complicated. Stay calm. If you panic, there are emergency exits and the wings and the sides. The point here is that sometimes fundamental discoveries you absolutely positively can't anticipate unless you're really connected to the problem, really speaking with your end target audience, in this case the industry, and understand the needs. I'll just say this novel indicator of fecal contamination in water from only human sources was discovered, for some other reason, but we can take that, and CPS is funding a project where this massively abundant gut virus, it doesn't hurt us, it's just a natural part, it's part of our internal workings, can help identify sources of water at risk due to human influences. Why is that important? There remain a number of human-specific viruses like norovirus, that's kind of the cruise ship virus, I won't say you get on the Disney cruise ship, no, and everyone gets sick, but it's fairly common. It's one of the #1 sources of foodborne illness, predominantly, at food preparation, not so much in the field, but out there as well, and hepatitis virus A. And what we're learning, through the FSMA produce safety rule trainings that I've done, I don't know, 24, 25 of those, and others, and talking with colleagues, identifying areas where faulty septic systems, drain fields, or discharges into water sources that are used for crop production, crop management, is far more common than we recognize. That virus, which is so abundant, is going to become a great rapid indicator of fecal contamination of human sources. Okay, so next step, besides the viruses, why is that important? That human-specific parasite, which you might recognize, Cyclospora, first came to prominence in food safety circles with raspberries and that outbreak. There were multiple outbreaks in 2018. A lot of factors could explain that, but clearly identified by the CDC, FDA, over 2,000 combined cases, but for the first time, very, very strong evidence that there's domestic sources of that contamination. So yes, we've known it's been present in water and in parts of border states, but this is deep into California, Oregon, and others, and a number of products. So again, screening water sources or using it as a research tool or primarily an investigative tool to get on top of the search for the sources of Cyclospora, source tracking and root cause is going to be a tremendous advantage. All right, I think the last area, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Listeria is a big topic. If you're a registered facility or buyers are saying, we want you to have an environmental monitoring program, we needed to understand a lot more about its prevalence. Not so much in fresh cut processing there too, but in primary packing operations. And the broader definition of ready to eat has placed a great emphasis on this. The backgrounds are just some of the, go ahead, pictures of some of the places what we found in doing broad surveys now for the last 4 years. And certainly Listeria monocytogenes, as they've said, is recognized. So these swabathons, invited with enrolled cooperators, come in, map out in our facility where the hot spots are, where we have transients, where we have residents, to help us design a master sanitation schedule. And if you can look, go ahead and flip the next one, please. It's concentrated where you would think, in areas where there's lots of water, where there's persistent water, that's where they tend to accumulate either the indicator Listeria, the monocytogenes, we find them both together, but also, go ahead, one more and one more. In other places where we can take that and type them and say, who's there, how are they being moved around by workers, by traffic, even at shipping docks where people are moving back and forth in forklifts, as a way to focus and prioritize the control. Go ahead. So I'm just going to walk you through only a little bit of data just to show you an example of the kind of work that CPS funds, the kind of work that we prefer to do is ask the question, how do we go about sharing knowledge about what's working, what's not working, and provide some data-based evidence for that. So just a number of different types of sanitizers. Go ahead to the next one. Because we had that spatial mapping from about 12 different facilities, we knew we could go back to a place with confidence, unfortunately, and always get a positive. So pre-cleaning, it's positive. Post-cleaning with detergents and things like that, still positive. The in-house programs were not effective at breaking through the biofilms or breaking through and killing everything. A couple of the next generation sanitizers were effective, or we introduced simply a higher dose of what they were using with a little more mechanical action. So we can use that, feed it back to people, and share the general knowledge with the industry. So I'm just going to introduce this and then turn it back over to Dave. One of the other is we move sort of from field to packing operation or processing, all the way out to retail. Understanding and controlling cross-contamination throughout that supply chain continuum is very important. You can see you focused on Cantaloupe. Go to the next. So one of the key outcomes at the field pack stage, one of the questions the industry asked was a lot of debate about what type of gloves are best and more likely to transfer. I'm not going to read through all of that. I'll just sort of quickly summarize it. What these studies, very careful studies done, showed that actually, contrary to what people thought, sort of the reusable types of gloves were not as good as single-use nitrile gloves or captive program reusable cotton gloves with a very good, rigorous cleaning and washing program every day, and also the kinds of time frames that you have to execute surface cleaning on the mobile equipment, and then the types of surfaces that would be more amenable to work with your program, just like I showed you in the packing shed for sanitizers. So I'm going to give it back to you, and you can take it into the retail for us.
So here's what I love about this example of research where it's really addressing all parts of the supply chain. And in this case, in this study, we found that by using foam trays, that was a transference for listeria.
Well, you got the jargon down. I'm going to hit the
again, I never thought I'd be able to say these things and make some logic out of it, but I have. But again, knowing that product that gets shipped can come into these foam trays, and see a kind of an example of a foam display, and knowing that that can provide an opportunity for cross-contamination. There's where the science tells us it may be a best practice not to use foam trays. Use other substitutes. So, of course, that's a best practice for us. We don't use foam trays for Cantaloupe, and we're looking at other items that maybe we shouldn't even have foam trays for, to allow on display that could cause some type of cross-contamination, and in this case, for listeria. So that's what I loved about this particular research. A great example of other parts of the supply chain were studied to make sure, okay, where's the opportunity to limit this introduction of this pathogen in product. So that brings me to, thank you, Trevor. For
maybe I could
please.
just add one thing really quickly, but again, this is that iterative process that we use trying to help take the results and then build on that. And so one of the opportunities is, of course, in my capacity in post-harvest quality, which is actually where I really enjoy working, but there's a reason that those are there. There's a reason that sort of cushioning, whether in packing or in display, is there. So then it gives other innovators and researchers an opportunity to say, okay, we don't really want to get rid of foam pads or other types of skid pads, but how can we do it to minimize the buildup of things like listeria by putting in something that's safe as an antimicrobial? So that's the next phase.
Yeah, what are other substitutes exactly? So I just wanted to also provide what funding has come to CPS over time. So since 2007, over $26 million has been generated for funding for more research, half through industry, half through government. That's why we have reliance on both you in the room and of course our government. 6 countries and then 42 institutions, 154 projects in total. And I can tell you that maybe not all 154, but there's been a good percentage that from the study, from the research, we've been able to provide a more educated response to best practices in good agricultural practices and GMPs as well. So that's just a summary of where CPS has gone since its early days. So again, going back to the mission, we're coming to a close here, to fund the science, find solutions, and really fuel that change that's required. And that's what has lived at CPS, and we hope to continue this effort. So the question is, how can you play a role? You are a big player. You own a stake in this industry, which means you all share and shoulder the results of something like an advisory.
Hit it one more time, Dave. There you go.
Oh, okay, as an industry representative.
There was a hidden message.
I split that up. Again, since you play a role, we think you can be part of the solution as well. One suggestion, again, I'm not going to come up here and start asking for a campaign fund and where can you contribute, but I just did. But second, if you are interested, and I'm hoping you are because you're part of the industry again, we have an annual symposium. And at this symposium, it's really an education session on current research, providing an update on what's happening with it, because it could be a 2-year research project. So giving us what's the update on where you're coming with this research, and then second, those who are completed their research. But what I love is I think a scientist, someone like Trevor, has to be in front of the room for what, 5 minutes to give a summary, 10 minutes of their project? They may push it a little, but
very stressful.
It's
5 minutes.
It's not a very lengthy conversation because, again, we want to make sure we convey to the audience, and the audience is, again, the C-suite, maybe the food safety experts, but at least it's understandable, and we know where the science is taking us. So it's a really good 2-day session, and it's in a warm place, Austin, Texas.
Yeah, but also the format then brings industry experts or maybe somebody from FDA or CDC, whatever.
Right.
After the scientist presents their basically high-level finding, they say, what does that mean? How would we use it? What are the key messages and take-homes that we got out of it? And they discuss it as a panel.
Thank you. Exactly. All right, that's our session that has come to a close. What we'd love to do is have some audience participation. So what are some burning questions for us? Certainly can be about CPS, certainly can be about research, certainly can be about retail and what we're doing with food safety. Please don't be shy or timid.
General question.
If not, I'll start picking on people I know. Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask. Hello? I'd like to ask a question about the current testing that's going on, say, in Yuma right now on the romaine, and that testing is being conducted at cooler level. What is the science or methodology behind that as opposed to going one step back at field level?
Yeah, well, a lot of what you're asking me to do is explain, hopefully not defend, FDA's decision about how to design these assignments. So I think in terms of, I'll answer, then you ask for a clarification. In terms of the science behind it, certainly the industry, since 2006-07, different times, different levels, different participants have been doing, pre-harvest testing, in the field, incoming raw material, finished goods. FDA is trying to understand and develop a database for themselves, since they don't have the industry's database, what the prevalence is, in a targeted area where we've had a couple of, multiple years of events and spread out. So in terms of the protocols, the technique, and the science part of it, well established. The sample size that they've chosen to use, going into a cooler, grabbing 10 heads, I'm simplifying it a bit, more or less, and then analyzing all of that is going to give them some measure of really what is the state of detectable contamination at that simplistic level. I mean, that's certainly not a statistically valid sample number, but that's not what they're going for within their resources. The other part of it, as if wearing this FDA hat, what they, I think, would explain is, yes, they're considering, they're in conversations with, industry associations and, other members of the industry about taking those samples at the field level so it's not so disruptive. We always say, whatever they come in and sample at the cooler, they've simply identified the lot that's going to be disposed of. But their argument is we want to look at that romaine after it's gone through all of the different handling and touch points that's then going to go to the consumer. So that, I think, is the explanation for how they've designed it, and there are a lot of ongoing conversations. They've definitely said that we intend to complete the assignment. They're about maybe 40% of the way through in the Yuma area specifically, and whether they do it anywhere else is up in the air.
Steve.
Trevor, where do you see the progression of the rapid detection systems coming so that we can get answers and do testing in a much more rapid sense, whether it's 6 hours, 12 hours, or 24?
Sure.
In particular for LM.
I'm sorry?
In particular for LM.
Yeah. So, again, that testing for the developers that go through the certification process, a number of companies. I mean, certainly in my experience, we've had the great opportunity to test, over the years, over the last decade, probably 15 different platforms. They have gotten progressively better, more specific, more sensitive, faster with a high degree of confidence. Actually, work that was connected with that Swabathon I mentioned that CPS funded. We spent a lot of time showing the optimization to do exactly what you asked for, and companies are working on that. So a lot of it comes down to there are better techniques now looking at somewhat different targets in the pathogens. Listeria was the first step to get that from, in many cases, a 36 to 48 hour time frame from industry testing, not the 10 days to 12 days to get an answer back from, say, the public health in many cases. You can get that down easily to, in the 8 to 10 hour time frame. Those things are being getting through the pipeline and being launched now, and I have a high degree of confidence in them. So I think we're getting closer. That's different than the time it takes for public health to work through what they have to do to get to a culture confirmation. I think we've been able to show with data that you can simply rely on that primary molecular detection, certainly for Listeria, and just take it that if you get a positive, it's there. This actually factored a lot. I won't, just going to share with the group that delay, that long time frame to get results back, certainly in my opinion with the data I've seen, is a lot of what caused that recent recall of stone fruit coming from Chile. It was that delay in multiple days before that result was provided back to the shipper that played a big role in that happening.
Other questions, comments, please?
I have a question when you're talking about farmers wanting to know how, what, when to reduce their risk. If you are finding problems with the amount of research you can do and the regionalization of water and water issues, to be able to give them something specific to help them.
Hang on, the acoustics in here are rough.
I know.
For water issues being very regional, how are you addressing farmers wanting to have a clear set of rules of how to minimize their exposure to food contamination from water?
Okay, that's a great question. There certainly are things that are shared elements of water quality. There's a lot of knowledge that resides in the USGS and EPA and the studies that they do of environmental water, recreational water that we draw on. So I'll give you a very short, make sure I keep it short, right? I'm going to give you a very short insight into where the CPS Ag Water funding is likely going to go, depending on how our board of directors, executive council, agree with me. In any case, the approach is to take the funding available for that breakout ag water call for proposals, break, in this case, we're going to have to keep it to the U.S., but break the U.S. up into regions, have a number of targeted institutions follow a standard program with standard protocols, standard data gathering, so everything is comparable. Then they can look at what happens in their region, and then we can pull all of that data together, turn it over to some people really skilled at looking at big data, come up with sort of, here's the commonality, here's the specificity, get states involved in helping to provide the funding for their local institutions to do that. So it's exactly to address the variability and the diversity that you mentioned that we're going to try and take on.
You did that very well, Trevor.
Thanks. That
Comments, questions, more, please.
Yeah, don't all come up after the thing's over and ask.
We got one up front too, and then Steve will come back to you.
Hey, so with monitoring and prevention being like the name of the game on the field grown side of things, there's only so much you can do, so much you can detect, so many samples you can take. Dave, on the retail side of things, do you see retailers kind of trying to hedge their bets, going more hydroponic, more greenhouse production with leafy greens to help mitigate risks in the future with recalls like what we've seen this year? Or?
It's a great question, and I hope everyone heard it. So does hydroponic, will that gain more traction knowing that field romaine has been under attack in terms of deadly pathogens? And I will tell you this, during the outbreak, during the advisory, hydroponic leaf, the roots still in the system, did extremely well. Because at one point they said they excluded that, or even if romaine hydroponic was taken out, all these other root system products did very well. We didn't have hydroponic baby leaf. We don't offer that at the time, so we don't know how that would have done. I'm sure for those who had it, and as long as it came back to the market, I'm sure that did okay. But I will tell you that the consumer was attracted to this hydroponic leaf. So, for what we do at Wegmans, it's not really what we decide what should be offered. It's really the customer who decides. And when we put products to market, they vote with their dollars, right? So if they are attracted to this item, and if at that point in time it was a hydroponic, even a baby leaf in this example with romaine, and again, that wasn't implicated, it's a choice for the customer they didn't have at the moment. And I would say that it would do quite well. So I just think with organic production and supply and weather issues and so on, that form of growing technique will continue to be explored. And I would think there'd be some growth opportunity there. Sure. Steve?
Trevor, in that Chilean tree fruit deal, did we learn something about how to contain an outbreak when they were able to contain it to 4,200 cases across the country? How did they get it so isolated and prevent it from rolling as way some of the other tree fruit outbreaks have happened?
So I'm going to be a little careful with how I respond, and that's easy because there's only so much information that I have. And I think part of it, it was in terms of both volume and where it went and who it went to, that they were able to do a good job within the traceability system that existed, and I think that hopefully answers enough of the question. There are other ancillary concerns that came about because a grower doesn't necessarily give 100% of its production to one shipper, one exporter, and how much that might influence what was going on. But I think that there was, a robust enough traceability, and then once the notification came to the importer of record, very good communication and lot tracking that helped get your arms around it in a hurry.
Trevor, is it a matter of that there's just more outbreaks, or we just know more today? Versus in the past, there may have been issues and we just may not have known at that point, right?
Well, yeah, we don't have to speculate at that. I mean, again, there's this difference between, and depending on the, on the pathogen, Listeria would be one. This is another challenge, and I don't think that we're ever going to change the zero tolerance approach that the U.S. has because of different experiences that they've had with outbreaks in other foods. But there's no question that we are all exposed to some very low level of these things, as environmental pathogens on a regular basis. The majority of the time, or the majority of us, can tolerate it really well. Some things push the exposure over the edge, and there are some very sensitive and vulnerable demographics, and we have to basically be working to make sure that their safety is taken care of.
Thank you. Comment?
Do you both think that the USDA and FDA could do a better job in notifying the consumers when there is an issue like the romaine issue? I mean, weeks later it came out, and then it was just a general statement that romaine was no good. And I know there were Florida growers and numerous growers, and it kind of hurt our business. And like Dave said, it still hurt the romaine category. So I'm wondering if you think there's a better system and a better way, which I think you guys are concentrating on, which is great across the whole states, the U.S. So I just wanted to hear your opinion on that.
Go first.
I'm going to punt that to Trevor.
So, I mean, that certainly is absolutely a multi-pronged approach to get better. Research is one part, but in general, that takes a longer period of time. Certainly what people like myself, Jennifer McIntyre at United, Bob Whitaker at PMA, who I know a lot of you know, other trade associations, industry associations, are all trying to advocate for is to get,
I don't know if that music means we got to get off the stage.
Yeah,
is that
probably.
what that means?
Anyway, one of the big opportunities I think that needs to keep being advocated for is to find a mechanism where FDA, and CDC can pull together, subject matter experts, whether, within industry, associations, and at some level academia, as that outbreak starts to be, unfold, even at the epidemiology, the earliest stages, because you can look at the multiple years, look at the states involved, same states, same seasonal time frame, therefore same channels of distribution. I mean, there are clues there that could help expedite identifying source, at least, if not root cause. That's a tougher one, but at least to more rapidly identify and help FDA get to those points of convergence, which is what they need to identify and limit the implicated product. Traceability systems, are going to help to a degree, and certainly FDA is working with us. They're not so excited about having a outbreak go team ready to go from other quarters, but we'll keep hammering on it.
So I think, thank you, Trevor, and I think the comment, not that I'm defending FDA, but we want to certainly protect public health as well. We don't want our customers to get sick, God forbid. And FDA, they don't want public health to be subjected to death and illness, et cetera, right? Hospitalizations and so on. That's the reality that we're dealing with here. And the biggest challenge is the timeline, because when an outbreak occurs, it's already too late, right? When the epi curve's going up with these illnesses and the health departments are reporting those, and what's the number that's the right number before they call it an outbreak? I don't know if it's the 20s or what, I don't know how they discern that, but somehow there's a number
of how many
illnesses and so on occur before
to define how many
define an outbreak.
To define an outbreak?
Yeah.
2.
Okay, so 2. So you get to 2, and now and so FDA's issue is, okay, there's illnesses, then they got to go talk to the customer. That's 3 weeks later at that point. And then by the time they get all the information they need from all the individuals at that point that have been sick, that's like 3 or 4 weeks later. We're already 7 weeks into this. And so we have no kill step. This is raw product that someone's consuming. It's not like you have the product around in your home at that point. So it's very difficult to understand the region, to pinpoint the issue and so on. Not defending it, but they have a very hard, difficult task. And that's why they keep asking for a robust traceability, effort for industry. And we need to step up and provide that. So, and hope it makes a difference.
I think we have time for one more quick question.
Really like the music they're choosing here. It's really.
Hi, thanks. Curiously, I was just wondering, I know these last outbreaks that did occur seemed like they occurred at the end of the growing season in both areas, in Yuma and Salinas. Is there any correlation to that at all in this?
To the seasonality of some of the outbreaks?
Yeah, occurring as the growing area was winding down. It appeared that the product was coming out of those areas when the season was getting ready to move to the next growing region.
Right. So the short answer is going to be yes. For quite a while, there's been an awareness of the sort of seasonality at some level associated with both ends of the transition period. So late season, say, coming out of the desert, early coming in, and then late again before it makes the trip back. Understanding exactly what causes that, partly, environmental, partly practices, behavior, who's there, who's on deck at those times, market value, all those things, I think, are factors that need to be sorted out to help explain why that seems to occur. There's certainly a lot of clues in terms of environmental issues related to climate, temperature, and et cetera. So I'll stop there, otherwise I'll really get into the weeds.
So, and before we end, I just want to say again, thank you to the Southeast Produce Council for allowing us to have this time, very invaluable time. And again, I thank you, because you can be part of the solution, not the problem. So, so you can help us in this cause here.
Just a reminder to everybody that we do have the second part of the continuing education series after this, marketing, in the room right next door. Thanks, everybody.
Great job. Nice. I think that worked out.